Hey everyone, welcome to another exciting episode of the Scratch the Track podcast presented by the Dude and Grim Show and co-produced by Mr. IVEST. I am the Dude.
And I am Grim, and today we are going to take a deep dive into this little gem right here, Mr. Bungle's California, and we are going to talk in depth about the song Pink Cigarette.
Yes. Now, we don't endorse smoking here, it causes cancer, but this song is kind of amazing. So,
dude, it is. It was. Oh, yeah, he's got the candies, Lucky Strikes. Light it up, dude.
All right.
This was one that always got to me early on because of the sound. I mean, not that I didn't like the composition, because I think, and actually once I looked into the composition a little more in terms of the chords and everything else, that was rather impressive as well. But initially, it's just that sound.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it has a dark, haunting sound, and when you're comparing it to the rest of the songs on the album, this is one that it might not stand out at first, because when you're talking about Ars Moriendi and
they all go so many different places, right?
Air Conditioned Nightmare, and this one kind of stays on the same track.
Yes.
But man, like, it is one, there's some very cool things. You know, we're going to do sort of a breakdown of the lyrical content, instrumentation, and the production of it. And when you actually start really kind of getting into it and I guess, you know, looking a little deeper, then, you know, some things stand out a little more.
Oh,
that, you know, maybe I sort of glossed over a little bit, you know. But again, this is one of our favorite albums, and I think one of the best songs on the album and one of the most accessible.
Yeah, I agree.
So
now,
if you're not a Mr. Bungle fan, this one shouldn't turn you off right away. And if this one does turn you off, then they might not be for you.
I didn't look if this one starts or ends the side. Do you know offhand?
I don't offhand.
Yeah, it would. I'm gonna look real quick. It would. I mean, honestly, based on the way the song ends. No, it doesn't. It starts the second side. But
okay.
I guess my only comment there was it would be such a great song to end a side based on the way that the song ends.
Yeah, actually.
And we won't
absolutely.
necessarily spoil that right now, but the ending's pretty amazing. So I guess with that, Pink Cigarette, we kind of go into the lyrics.
Yeah, I mean, overall, you kind of get right away that this is sort of about a relationship, a broken relationship between a man and a woman. And the way I always took it is that, you know, it seems like she kind of had been maybe walking all over him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then just up and left.
Yeah, pretty much. And it sounds like, though, as we'll get deeper into the lyrics, it sounds like she'll leave at times and she'll come back. She'll leave and come back, perhaps. But the main lyric that stood out to me that was just kind of like the abusive lyric sort of is like, all these years I've been your ashtray.
Yeah.
I mean, that's such a great way to say it, especially just having a song, you know, Pink Cigarette. I just think that's a really, really cool.
Yeah, because
cool
it's just like the lipstick on the mouth end of it, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's
And you know, it seems like I took it as him sort of being too weak and almost too shameful to really maybe fully stand up for himself or just leave, because he's like, you know,
exactly.
I'm hoping the smoke hides the shame I've got in my face.
That's the lyric I wanted to mention when you said the word shameful, because the word shame is in the song, and that's
right.
kind of a telling thing.
Right. And now we have then, you know, I found a pink cigarette on the bed the day that you left. Sort of, there's a couple things that I sort of read into that. I mean, obviously it's, you know, she's got lipstick and she's leaving and she's smoking and she's going out. But I also kind of looked at it as she's getting done up and she's
sure,
dressed to the nines. She put her lipstick on and it's just kind of like, hey, it's bold, and it's kind of like, you know, there is a lyric in here about, you know, the cigarette, I think, on the bed, and you know, I could almost see her just, you know, getting in a fight or something like that, and she's done smoking and she just throws it, right?
See you later.
Yep.
You put this out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, but there is one thing though that did that made it seem like there was a struggle. I think he probably looked at it as, she had the power and he was too weak, but it sounded like he wants something and wants something more from her. Like he's not getting enough.
Oh yeah. Like definitely a kind of an unrequited love scenario. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And he even says, your eyes cried at last, told me everything I was afraid to ask.
Yeah.
So, it seems like there was some on her end where, she was emotional and she did get into it, and it was difficult for her too. But he wasn't able to kind of like ask the tough questions and try to get down to what the root cause of the issues were. So,
yeah, sure.
and I think, your kiss goes everywhere, touches everything but me, meaning that he probably sees it as she's giving out to all of these other people in the rest of the world, maybe not in a romantic or sexual manner, but someone who's married to their job or their profession.
Yeah,
or,
sure.
Those types of
or
elements.
is like a star.
Yeah.
Yeah,
or is
yeah,
like a star.
right. And that's where I think, and now, I mean, I'm not going to totally touch on it, but the end of the song, I mean, culminates with this person committing suicide. And not to get into too much of the production early on, but I think the presence of the EKG machine, hearing the heart rate as it goes faster and faster and just flatlines at the end is, I mean, I've always been a sucker for real sounds in music, like word painting. And if that isn't word painting, I don't know what is. It's such a great example of it. And it's that sound. It's almost like you could have made an EKG sound on a synth. You could have made something like an EKG sound on a synth, but actually sampling the machine itself, which I have to believe they did based on how it sounds.
It sounds very good.
It's so sharp and it's so piercing. It just, like when that flat line comes up, I mean, like, call out the time,
absolutely. Time. Well, in the way I kind of take the end of this song too is I think he probably felt that he couldn't reach her.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so this was his way. He's like, all right, you know what? I'm going to do this. And maybe not like I'm going to win, but I'm going to make her feel something.
Yeah.
And she's going to know that, I did this and, unfortunately did it because of her, but it's, you'll find a note and you'll see
my silhouette.
My silhouette.
Yeah.
And then he does sort of the countdown.
Yeah, and I like the way they do that.
Until you find me dead. And so that's what made me think, actually, when, there's just 5 hours, there's just 4 hours. He has an inclination that she's coming back. And so that's why there's a part of me,
that she's going to find him.
This has happened before, right? And he's like, you know what? This is the last straw, right?
This ain't the last time.
This ain't the last time.
Yeah. I love the whispers. Now, I guess before we get to talking about too much of the vocals, and I guess this will lead into the vocals, how the vocals sound, because this is kind of the nature of the song. But in terms of how it sounds, I feel like this song is in many ways done in kind of a soul style. The way that they play the guitars, the sound of the guitars, everything's drenched in reverb, and to be more specific, spring reverb. And now I didn't turn on my amp and get a really high spring reverb setting because you can just listen to the song, and I'm not going to be able to quite capture it in the context of this podcast quite as well. But it's very much there, and some of the devices they use in terms of harmony and melody, I think, are there too. And his vocal, the style of his vocal is almost like crooned.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's very different from the rest of the album. It's specific.
Absolutely.
Everything has a lot of space behind it. It has the right sound. And even in the beginning, when you hear those guitars go I mean, you can hear the spring reverb in everything. You know, it's really evident. And I think when you look at the, unfortunately, the credits for the album are not terribly detailed in terms of who's adding what in which particular song. One thing that stood out to me is that somebody, I think it's Bill Banovitz, is credited with playing the English horn, and I think the English horn is that. You know, I think that is that sound, because I can't think of anywhere else in the album
where else it would fit
that would have been.
Yeah. You know, I think one thing is that, you know, with this album, you know, there are a lot of unique songs. Like there's not another song like this. There's not another song like Vanity Fair or Goodbye Sober Day or Sweet Charity, you know, Air Conditioned. You know, they're all so unique, but kind of like what you're talking about, how he sings this one. You can tell that there's this deep passion and deep emotion there.
Now, it's funny you say that, because with Vanity Fair, I think this is more like Vanity Fair in terms of how it's presented than anything else.
Sure,
although I wouldn't say that they're alike.
No,
but there is some similarity in the presentation of them.
Yeah. And I just think with, you know, I don't know if we want to get into sort of the vocal sound, but, you know, this song, the unique characteristic, to me, it's the most real, I think, song on the album, like as far as just the deepness and the emotion. And
it doesn't sound, in a way, it doesn't sound as overproduced. And that's not a criticism. This is one of my favorite albums ever. So like, it is overproduced, but it's done that way because playing live and in the studio are two different art forms. And they took the studio art form to the next level with this album overall. But to me, this is the one that would probably translate better than anything live.
Yeah, I would say this one. I've seen it. I know there is, live videos. I forget. I don't know. It's like Riot Fest or whatever the festival is, but they play this one. I think they play Air Conditioned Nightmare. I'm trying to think what else.
I think Ars Moriendi. I think they play a good chunk of it. Too. Now that you brought up the video, I kind of want to talk about the video, because there is a video out there for this song, and I didn't realize it until I read the comments. But as far as I understand, Mr. Bungle did not make the video for this song. That is a fan-made video. Which,
dude, they put some time into it. Like, it wasn't done with just like a handy cam.
No,
you can tell it's quality camera, and they really put some time and energy into it. So it's pretty cool.
And one thing I like about it is, to me, it takes a slightly different path than you might have thought with the lyrics, but it still works because it's like from the lens of somebody who's obsessed with this other person, and they don't even know that they exist. And the thing that I think is interesting is they get into this bit at the end, and he's like kind of holding her down in a violent manner,
trying to put the lipstick on.
Yeah,
lipstick on her
but
face
in his mind, they're like dancing. Yeah, and that's what's so like it's really kind of sick, but well done in that same sense, you know.
Yeah. So if you did the video out there or know somebody,
great job.
Tell them. Really good job. Yeah, absolutely. And we should also say that, hey, you know, this is, again, one of our favorite songs. There's not a ton of information out there. So if you guys have information on this song, instruments, who plays certain parts and everything, definitely let us know, because this is a collaborative community.
Please go ahead and
like, subscribe, and comment below.
Do that too. Yeah. So I think this might be good to get into sort of like the vocals and everything.
Yeah.
You know, one thing that I think is really cool is again, we were almost talking about how this song is sort of underproduced, but the more you listen to it, there are so many layers to this. I mean, even from a vocal standpoint, you know, you have the whispering, you have sort of the doubling of the whisper vocals, right? Kind of in the background. You have
in the background vocals when he said just 5 more hours and it's really thick.
there are definitely, layers there. And then you have when he kind of sings, I found a pink cigarette on the bed the day that you left. That's really just kind of him solo. He's not doubled there. It's not ghostly. He's singing it. Yeah. He's singing it pretty boldly, right? So I just thought it was cool, some of the things that they did and some of the harmonies and everything they have going on in it. Now, when you compare it to, again, some of the other songs, at first maybe the production doesn't stand out to you, but the more I listen to it with a fine ear, I'll tell you what, like there's some stuff, there's a lot of stuff going on.
Oh, it's great. And I think I don't want to get too into like breaking down the chords. I guess I was kind of surprised to look it up in more detail. But I was more interested in some of the devices that they use, because one thing when we were talking offline about it, you said there isn't a whole lot of guitar in this song.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And there is and there isn't, but they do it in the way of kind of like that old soul style where in the beginning they're kind of doing... they're doing those arpeggios in B. Yeah, and everything they do with the guitar, I think, is very, very subtle. But I think the most notable device that they use is when he gets into the end and they start doing the countdown. And he talks about, and you'll see my silhouette. And then you go to the minor.
Boom. Yeah, right there. Boom.
Yeah, it just everything about there's something about, and that's something that you'll hear. I could play you a lot of songs that kind of start on that minor chord, and then they go up to the 4, and then go to the minor 4, and then that to me is the part that really musically hooks me more than anything. Sure, I think the rest of the song is incredibly well done in the way it's written, but the way that hits really has always got me going to the minor 4.
Yeah, I mean, and there is...
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, there is, again, very minimal guitar, but even when it's there, I feel like they do a very good job almost of kind of masking it.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it's, a lot of...
Yeah.
It's a lot of those little just hits, which is nice because I think that the other instruments kind of take the place of setting the harmony and making it thick. And that's where I think the English horn comes in there with that doo-doo-doo-doo, it's that kind of the way that everything, the instruments are all arranged is very interesting. And that's
okay. Maybe that was an English horn then, because I had in my notes, I thought like I heard an oboe or something and something like that. Maybe that's the English horn actually.
Yeah, based on what I see credited, I see that as being the most likely kind of thing. Like, how you never think to yourself, man, that French horn part, and you can't always get what you want, is really awesome. But it's there.
Yeah. It's there.
Right. You know what I mean? Yeah. And you're like, I don't know when else a French horn has really been that prominent in rock and roll. But now that I say that, I know there's a Neil Young song where it is too. I think it's I was sleeping in a burned out basement. Okay. Right. I think he's got one in there too. But it's just one of those instruments that
after the gold rush,
is an uncommon instrument, so to speak, in rock and roll. But like in this context, it works really well.
It does. Well, and there's just, I feel like everything, almost all the instruments in this song are very subtle. Even like there's very little drumming, going on, and it's very just, everything just feels so sort of gentle. I know. And that's why, I would really like to understand who was someone is credited with French horn. That's someone in the band that could have been in there too. But it's the instrumentation is done very deliberate and very subtle and extremely well, because
you can't imagine how else you would play it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And, I think, I don't know if we want to sort of transition into sort of the production a little bit at this point.
Yeah.
We've kind of touched on it. For me, I guess the way I would say, I would say the production is very sneaky on this track.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it took me a while to really appreciate it and understand it. And, we did do an episode on sort of the full breakdown and review of this album. So go ahead and look that up. But,
right after
like, subscribe, and comment below.
And I forget how did they record this? Was it, I forget. I know we had information on like the tape machines and everything that they used. I know things were done, I think, at different studios throughout San Francisco. So that escapes me right now. But I know both you and I were very, very surprised at, I think, what they used to record this album, and what they got out of it is just amazing.
Yeah, as far as I can see, it was basically they were using a 24-track tape machine, and then they had 2 ADATs that were linked.
That's okay.
And I believe ADATs would give you another 8 tracks apiece.
Okay.
So on top of that, and I think there was a comment that said this record would have been much easier had Pro Tools been widely available.
I mean, I don't know, man, because what year was this? This came out the same year as Californication, didn't they? Came out almost the same time.
Yeah, it came out in '99, but the thing is, I mean, it was recorded in late '98, and I just don't know. I mean, yeah, that stuff was out there, but at that point, it was almost more prohibitive than using tape, because if you were to do something in Pro Tools and then say, okay, well, I want to hear that back with this effect, dude, it could take like an hour for that thing to render.
That's a good point.
Because the computers just weren't there yet. Yeah. And I mean, it's one thing just for the computers to record the tracks, but then the processing power, I think, is where it got a little hairy. Yeah. And so at that point, it was probably easier to use traditional style gear because of that.
Yeah.
Not to say that made it easier overall, because this album must have been just a monster to produce. I would love to see a classic albums on this where they're at the board it'd
be amazing. Yeah.
Dude.
Well, I think that's a good thing to ask some, if anybody out there knows like how they took the recording further. Like, did they dump it into Pro Tools? Because kind of ironically enough, we are doing an episode on Red Hot Chili Peppers' Californication. And when I was reading about that album, now Red Hot Chili Peppers, at the time, who knows what the perception of them was, but what they did with Rick Rubin is they recorded everything on tape and then dumped it into Pro Tools.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. They could have done something like that here too. They did have Warner Brothers backing them, so I imagine there was. Definitely some money involved.
And one thing I like is that the only way this album even got recorded is that Mike Patton basically like hedged his bets on everything that Faith No More had done up to that point. Yeah. And basically like used that as collateral to make this album.
Yeah, and I think that's what actually one of our commenters said on the California album.
Yeah.
He was basically like, the reason Mr. Bungle was allowed to do a lot of the things they did is they wanted to keep him happy, which makes sense. You have a talent, you have somebody bringing in money, and selling albums, like you want to keep your talent happy. And plus, I have a feeling Mr. Bungle wasn't like stretching the budget too thin.
No, but it's just so crazy because previous Mr. Bungle and Faith No More, in my opinion, can't hold a candle to this, can't touch it. Any of the songs. It's just this is a masterpiece, unlike a lot of things that you will hear. And I don't think it's for everybody, but for those who get it, I mean, it'll probably make your top 5 because it's
And I think that's one thing I'd sort of like to know, because in our review of this album and some other of Mr. Bungle's work, I find that more people are gravitating towards like Disco Volante as being their favorite album or the debut over this one. And I just,
I don't get it.
For me, I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but this, to
I
me,
think they like
I've
the
never heard
craziness
anything
of
like
it. I think for a lot of that early stuff, it's the craziness. It's just that stuff was out there in a way that other things weren't. I would make the same argument about this, but at the same point, it was more coherent, and it was a better work of art as a whole, in my opinion.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
This song is, I think, a good one to, if you haven't got into it, to get into it. But with all that said, doing deep dives is something that we want to keep doing. So in the spirit of California, please let us know below
like, subscribe, and
what we
comment
should
below.
do next.
What song should we do next? Because we were thinking about Goodbye Sober Day. We were thinking about Retro Vertigo. I mean, we'll probably do all of them at some point, but we definitely like to come up with an order. So
yeah, and I like to get into the music part of it too, but I mean, I don't need to play every part of the song for you and break it down into a musical analysis. I just think there's some devices that people use that are interesting to discuss, right? And
absolutely. So, well, I think that about wraps up Pink Cigarette
Yes,
Deep
sir.
Dive by Mr. Bungle. Thank you for watching, everyone. It was a fabulous episode, fabulous time. We'll see you next time on the Dude and Grim Show.